Thanks, Stephen. I think there can be few periods where perhaps that often quoted Chinese curse, "May you live in interesting times," is so appropriate. And I know as someone who's running a business in our industry, as we look at the question of growth beyond Brexit, it's a challenge to get a clear picture. And perhaps there are two key reasons for this. First of all, Brexit is unknown territory. We know what it looks like when countries join the EU, but no one's really bailed out like we're about to before. So what does that look like? Also, we don't really know what the impact will be because the government won't share their impact studies with anyone, in fact, and decided this week not to share their view of the position that the city should take in negotiating as we go through to Brexit. I think as well as that sort of unknown territory that we're stepping into, there's also the question that how much of this is actually in our control. When you look at the big issues that we're facing besides Brexit as an industry, a lot of them are things that we can influence, whether it's things around brand safety, some of the questions about digital media at the moment, perhaps highly scrutinized areas like food, gambling, communication, etc. We play such an active role in really shaping our response to those questions, whereas if we're not careful, Brexit is something that will happen to us from outside. And so it's, I think that's what makes the next session so interesting, because what we're going to hear is we're going to hear from some key leaders in our sector about the key things they're doing to think about Brexit and to prepare their businesses and organisations for that. So I'd like to call to the stage Lindsay Pattison, Chief Transformation Officer of Group M, and Alex Mahon, CEO of Channel 4, and James Wildman, CEO of Hearst UK. Thank you very much. Whilst they take to the stage, we've got another one of the Ad Association polls to do, which is think about your organisations and your businesses. How ready are you feeling for Brexit? If you can go to your app and vote, you have three options. Do we really have to leave? Nearly ready for Brexit, but still a way to go, or bring it on? The Liam Fox end of the spectrum. Okay, so that's interesting because it's there's perhaps a bit more in the chucker camp than in the first poll that we had this morning, and but I think probably what this really points to is perhaps the fact of that so many of us are dealing with a development that might affect us in many different ways, and yet there's so much we don't know about it. So what better than to hear from some expert leaders within the industry about how they're shaping what they're doing. Alex took over at Channel 4 in October last year, and so it will be fascinating to hear really the perspective of one of our most dynamic broadcasters, most creative broadcast organisations, grappling with the approach to Brexit, and particularly as a public service broadcaster. Lindsay, as well, has taken on a new role recently, having been running Maxus so successfully as Chief Executive. She's recently stepped up to Worldwide Chief Transformation Officer at Group M. We're lucky to have her here because she's actually been at Davos, I think, for 3 years, talking about the future of media in a global context. And we also have James Wildman, who has been CEO at Hearst since April 2017, and bringing a great perspective because not only is he dealing with Hearst and many of their amazing media brands, but comes from a background at Trinity Mirror and before that at Yahoo. So each of them has been set a very simple question, which is to say, what is one key thing that they're considering in the approach to Brexit? And we're going to have a few minutes from each of them to talk about that, and then we'll have some questions and discussion. So I think we'll start off with Alex, if we may. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thanks for having me. I started 2 months ago at Channel 4, which is properly the best job in the world. It's a place that exists to stimulate public debate. It's about creative innovation. It's about current affairs and about appealing to all audiences and championing diversity. And it's about different views. So what better debate than Brexit? Because I think we've seen from this morning that nobody can agree anything about it. Although I was interested by now, people are pressing bring it on, whereas to start off with, nobody pressed turn off the lights, I'm going back to sleep on the first question. So the immediate challenge that the industry's faced, of course, is the uncertainty around Brexit. I mean, no industry likes uncertainty, and that's caused a massive swing in the 12 months after the Brexit vote in terms of the TV ad market. So we went from +5 before to -5 afterwards. And that was difficult to cope with, but the good news is, from our perspective, and as I think we saw in one of Vicky's charts, all of which I've absorbed, and I've got up here, Vicky, that the final quarter of 2017 and the first quarter of 2018 are looking a lot better. And we're predicting that TV advertising will actually end up in a good place for the year. And that's because people are turning to TV as the most effective way to reach audiences in this tough environment. So that to one side, we then think about Brexit in 3 ways. The first of all, I think the big challenge for us as a public service broadcaster is the fact that the referendum exposed such huge rifts in Britain. The fact that there are rifts between generations, between social groups, between regions, and as well as, of course, between the nations. And Channel 4's role in this debate is quite vital. You know, we're like a prism through which people reflect on the nation. And we've got an important role to play in that in terms of both how people understand the issues, but also how they talk about them. You know, our job is, you know, what it says in the remit is our job is to represent diversity. Historically, we've tended to think about that diversity in terms of ethnicity or sexuality, and now we're having to think about what does it mean in terms of the differences between what people think in Bristol or what they think in Birmingham, or also just the diversity of views in the UK. I think society has now become quite polarised in terms of that view, and it's quite important for Channel 4 to think about how we don't contribute to that ongoing sense of disenfranchisement. So encouraging debate on air and challenging views, we have to do that without polarising the audience even further, and that's quite a difficult and messy and extraordinarily important job. So that's a big thing for us this year, is to think about how we do that editorially. The second thing that we think about is how are we going to survive as television broadcasters in a Brexit environment with increasingly and somewhat unceasing digital competition that's completely international. So the increase in the ominously named FANGs, and them investing in content sounds kind of wonderful, right? Because they're spending 15 billion on content. But their mission is entirely different to ours. Their mission is to find things that are global, that appeal to as many people as possible, and really that do so by means of an algorithm. And our mission is completely different. You know, it's to reflect Britain in all of its glory and its quirkiness. So Netflix isn't interested in, you know, we put on a show last year which was about a struggling secondary school in a diverse community in Salford, and that was called Educating Greater Manchester. You're never going to find that on Netflix or Amazon, but it's hugely popular here. And it's never going to have global appeal. Now, of course, we don't just want stuff that's totally gritty and kind of urban environments, but it is a really important part of public service television in this country. And if we sort of continue in a world where only the biggest things are funded that are international, then those kind of shows and that kind of talent will really disappear. And it won't be lost on this room that, of course, a Netflix or an Amazon environment doesn't have any ads in it whatsoever. So there's no way for this community to reach consumers in those environments. And so the bullseye for us is, of course, stuff that's compelling, that reflects British creativity, that's got important things to say about the nation, but isn't just kind of gritty and depressing, right? You want popular at the same time. So at the moment, we've got on Kiri, which is about the challenges faced by a social worker in Bristol in a kind of racially charged situation. But that's got Sarah Lancashire in it, and it's kind of hitting the ball out of the park with ratings. And we've got Dairy Girls on, which is, this is actually a very funny comedy, but it won't sound like it, which is kind of about 1980s growing up in Londonderry as a group of teenage girls against the background of the Troubles. One of the best comedies we've had on in years. So that's a challenge for us, right, as Channel 4, is how do we reflect that? How do we do that creatively and commercially when we're in a Brexit environment, when we're making half of our stuff all over the nations and the regions, but we're facing that international competition? And the third thing we think about is young people, because we're the youngest skewing public broadcaster in the world. Channel 4 news programme is the only thing that over-indexes in terms of news to 16 to 34s, and young people, most of them younger than everyone in this room, are going to be living with Brexit a lot longer than us. So they're a generation that's totally agile, that's really interested in news, but equally they're exposed to fake news. And we have a really important role to play there. And one of the really important things we also do as Channel 4 is to back young talent and to bring young talent into the industry. And we've got a very rich history in that, and it's really important that we keep doing that to ensure that we keep Britain strong in terms of those exports. So I thought, because I thought you might be getting a bit sleepy by now, I'd just show you one little clip. Channel 4 also explores issues beyond these shores, and we make movies as well as TV programs. So I'm just going to show you a clip before I round up.
What's going on with these billboards, Mildred?
My daughter Angela was murdered, and the police department is too busy eating Krispy Kreme to solve actual crime.
I'm in the middle of my damn Easter dinner. Sorry, kid.
And about time you got home to your mama?
I told her I was going to be out till 12.
All this anger, it just begets greater anger.
I saw you on TV the other day. You look good.
I think the guy wants to get in my pants.
3 billboards.
3 Billboards is a movie that we funded. It picked up 4 Golden Globes a couple of weeks ago. It's had 7 BAFTA nominations, 7 Oscar nominations we got this week, and 9 BAFTA nominations. It's with Frances McDormand and Woody Harrelson and Sam Rockwell, as you saw there. But that's a film with a director that we've backed 4 times, that we worked with when they came into the industry. And I think it's an example of what our job is in this. You know, the best way of responding to the challenges of Brexit is to play to our strengths, is to be innovative, is to be creative, is to be commercial, and to be that best version of Britain that exports things around the world. I will hand over to Lindsay.
Thank you. That is an amazing film. If you haven't seen it, I saw it a couple of weeks ago. It's fantastic. So I have chosen to focus on talent. I'm really glad I chose to not focus on macroeconomics, having seen Vicky talk so eloquently, so few. So why have I chosen to focus on it? Well, we're a talent business. We're a service industry. It's our key attribute. The people that walk through our doors, come into our lifts every single day, all around the world, are the most important people to WPP, from copywriters to data scientists, from search specialists to crisis management PR. No jokes required on needing that right now. So we really welcome the agreement at the end of last year, and this is an area where we do have a bit more certainty that our colleagues who arrive before Brexit Day on May the 29th, 2019, will have the right to stay. And that deal also includes rights, reunification rights for relatives and partners of those EU citizens. So settled status is a great step forward in an area where I do think we've made great progress. So why have we chosen to focus on talent? Firstly, scale. 7% of the UK labour force are EU nationals, but WPP is over double that. 15% of the 17,000 people we employ here in the UK, which is just over 2,500 for those of you that can do the maths, are non-UK EU nationals. And for some of our companies, the more high-tech focused, actually Manjari, who you'll hear from later, who runs one of our data analytics business, that can rise up to 40% non-UK nationals. So what are we going to do about keeping that talent here? And then the UK, in general terms, is the number 2 market for WPP globally. It accounts for almost 3 billion of revenue, so it's very important to us. So the key issue is, how do we keep our EU talent working in the UK, and how do we continue to attract talent in once May 29th has gone forward? The second reason to focus on talent is we all know that diversity is good for business. Specifically, it's very good for our business, where diverse people bring different perspectives and they see a problem faster. They think about more creative ways to solve those challenges, and we need that innovation, that creativity, and that speed more than ever. And at a more prosaic level, of course, WPP works with global companies, so we need, and we're targeting global audiences, so simplistically, we need different languages are a vital skill set in today's globally connected digital world. And moreover, when you think about the talent base and the people that we're trying to attract to work in WPP, the best talent really want global mobility. They're attracted by the prospect of working in multiple markets. 85% of Gen Y and Z want cultural exposure as part of their development. And if I look at Group M, the media part of WPP, just under 80% of our colleagues sit in Gen Y, Gen Z, so we need to make sure we're doing what we can for them. So what are we actually doing about it? As Chuka said, take some action. We're doing 3 things. I should say 4 because Martin will talk about Brexit daily. But the first thing we're doing is government influence. And again, Chuka said, what can you do? What's the industry doing? What can you do as an individual company? How do you work with the AA? So we, our General Counsel, Andrea Harris, who's an amazing woman, is part of the GC 100 committee, which is made up of the FTSE 100 General Counsel and Company Secretaries. A clear tenet for that group at the moment is obviously the Brexit transition. We've also introduced to that committee one of our WPP advisory firms who specialise in navigating between business, politics and policy making. So we sit in that group and we're also lobbying and working also. The second area is just getting ahead on a talent strategy. You know, the date isn't changing. Chuka sounds quite optimistic with a 25% view that it may not happen. I think it probably will happen, so let's carry on and minimise the disruption to our talent. So right now, of course, we've got a team of legal, HR and business leaders working out exactly what we do to get ahead. So we've started by collecting the data to understand the scale of the challenge, what's the composition of our talent base, where have they come from, what's their specific skill sets. Moving on, how do we get them a visa status before that date? How do we learn from other mobility practices we already have in place? You know, we obviously move talent all over the world. MediaCom, one of our agencies, has 10% of its global workforce at any time working in a different market. So we need to learn from that experience. And we can think about mobility more broadly and how technology can help us with mobility and how we partner up some of our UK-based employees with people around the world. And above all, I think we need to communicate. I saw a study that said 52% of non-British workers in the UK say there've been ineffective or no communication on Brexit from their employer. Now, we're a communication industry, so our task is to over-communicate to our colleagues and reassure them about what we're doing to help them going forward. And you saw the ad at the start of today, a fantastic ad by the Ad Association. And I think, you know, we are a creative industry, so what can we do? What can our clients do? You know, we want to encourage our clients to be brilliant in their own creativity to show that we are open for business and that we welcome talent from all over the world. So I just want to end with sharing an amazing film created by JWT London for HSBC. It's called Global Citizen. It launched a couple of weeks ago. It's part of a broader campaign called Together We Thrive, and it shows the UK is open for business, globally connected, and a great place to live and work.
We start the day with a Colombian, a Guatemalan, or a piping hot Costa Rican. And a Danish to go. We drive German, Japanese, German, and we ride Taiwanese. We watch American movies on Korean tablets and struggle with Swedish flat packs. Our heroes hail from Chile, Argentina, Brazil, and often Belgium. We eat Chinese, Italian, Indian, and go Dutch. Some of our best friends are Mexican, Siberian, Hungarian, and French. Hey. We live on a wonderful little lump of land in the middle of the sea. But we are not an island. We are part of something far, far bigger.
Fantastic ad. So let's get on with it. I think the date will happen. What can you do now to start to retain and attract new talent coming in? How do we showcase the positivities of living and working in the UK? And the UK is ranked as the second most desirable place to work, ahead of actually the US, Australia and Canada. So we are a great place to live and work, and I think we can play a massive role in attracting that. So with the right communication and the right investment, we'll continue to be a force going forward. So thank you. I'll hand over to James.
Thank you, morning, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. It's very good to be here. I'm following, obviously, some very impressive speakers already, and some of the themes that I'm going to touch on have already been mentioned. But I found, James has set this up as what are these businesses doing and what are we most concerned about regarding Brexit? And in actual fact, that was quite difficult from a Hearst point of view for a few reasons that I'll just quickly talk through. So first of all, the impact of Brexit. It is true to say that whilst we are part of a huge and very diversified global business, Hearst in the UK is essentially a number of iconic incredibly, extraordinary media brands, I would say. They've been around for a very long time and are very trusted by our huge audiences. But we are essentially a British business in the UK, super serving British audiences. So we don't have the same issues as, say, WPP does. We have no issue attracting great talent, but that talent tends to be British. We have about 1,000 people in our company in the UK writing content for British audiences. So culturally, it's very important that we are hugely attuned to our audiences, and therefore we don't have the same international talent issues that Lindsay's just touched on. We do, though, have the same challenges that Alex has talked to, which is how do we ensure that our content, our relevance, remains as important, you know, as concrete now as it has been for very many decades. So one of the economic challenges that I would suggest that we clearly do face is around paper production. We sell almost 5 million magazines a month in the UK, and our second biggest cost over and above people is paper, and we import pretty much all of that. So, you know, the UK paper production business isn't sufficient to cater for all the newspapers and the magazine businesses in the UK. So all of us are importing, and clearly with trade tariffs, which may come as a result of Brexit, and the changing exchange rate that we've suffered, that has become more of an issue for us, and we're having to budget and think about that from an economic point of view going forward. Similarly, the printing, the actual physical printing of our magazines, 3 of our magazines are actually printed in Poland, where you know, there are facilities that can produce some of the more glossy magazines that we produce that can't actually be created in the UK. But over and above that, you know, economic factor, the other thing that I wanted to touch on briefly, which Vicky mentioned already, is the data and the regulatory framework that we're working within, which has been very much part of an EU approach. GDPR is with us in May, as Vicky said, and all businesses and all the businesses represented here in this room, not just Hearst, are fixated in ensuring that we are fit for purpose come the regulatory change. Again, though, leaving the EU doesn't necessarily impact hugely on this because the government's already working. In fact, the bill is going through Westminster right now to ensure that even if there was a precipitous Brexit, a hard Brexit, we would still have a regulatory regime in the UK that, around data protection, which was very aligned with the EU. So from a specific, what does Brexit mean for Hearst's point of view, I would say that other than that economic and regulatory perspective, not a huge amount. But what I did think might be interesting is to think about it more on a societal level. This is obviously from the Advertising Association's website. Our advertising industry is an extraordinary advert for Britain, but the same probably can't be said for Brexit itself. And obviously the now infamous bus side, which Chuka referenced earlier on, is perhaps representative of the crisis of trust, essentially, that we find ourselves facing in the UK. You could argue it's a global phenomenon, but I would suggest that Brexit itself has contributed significantly to this anxiety which is currently felt by society at large. And Vicky went through some very compelling economic forecasts that should give us all some confidence, but it's also true to say that as a society, concerns over the economy, much broader worries around terrorism, Trump, Syria, etc., are all becoming increasingly cemented in our everyday lives. Fake news, fraud, whether you believe that on the side of a bus, I mean, depending on who you listen to, whether you listen to Chuka or the right-wing press in the UK, Brexit is either the best thing since sliced bread, or we're going to hell in a handcart. You know, I mean, and we're all expected to make our form our views based on some very polar, opposing perspectives. So I thought it might be interesting. Oh, I'm going to play this video and then I'll come back to it. voluminous short video, really just to represent the fact that our world is on edge, and that itself poses a very significant threat to advertisers, because, you know, with the preponderance of fake news, etc. now, and it's quite timely in the week that Edelman reported on its brand barometer for 2018, trust's never been at a lower ebb, trust in government, business, the media and NGOs. So that represents a very significant concern for all of us. And in terms of what we are specifically doing about that, it is essentially to play to our strengths. And I'm talking on behalf of all magazines here, because our media, both in print and in digital, is all about helping our consumers get more out of life. You know, it's highly positive, but first and foremost, it's highly, highly trusted. Our media is trusted. And I think that without in any sense being blasé or complacent, there is a very significant voice that we're hearing ever more loudly now coming from the advertising sector around this concern of trust. And I think the lighthouse brands, such as Channel 4, such as our own and others, you know, in the professionally produced media sector, are increasingly going to become more and more important, I think, as technology and social media fragments audiences ever more, and this concern about trust proliferates. So that was my thought. It's not meant to sound complacent. I think that we're in a great place, actually. Brexit seems to be, you know, driving uncertainty, economic uncertainty, which in turn is driving short-termism within advertising. A half of all media spend last year was on direct response. I mean, that's an extraordinary growth over just a few years, obviously driven by e-commerce as well as, you know, short-term tenures of marketeers, etc. There's lots of things contributing to that. But we feel very strongly that actually we, on the professionally produced side of the business of media, are in a very, very good place, actually, as audiences look for an antidote to some of that noise and trust concerns that exist ever more. So thank you very much. Thank you, James.
So I think we've got a few minutes for some questions and some discussion as a panel. And there's some questions coming in over the app. And we'll start with one of those, actually, which is, given the potential negative impacts of Brexit, what does each member of the panel think is the best way our industry can help positively influence negotiations? And we'll start with you, Alex. You've had the longest gap.
I guess, look, in our role in that is not really to lobby either way. It's to source public debate and to allow for that confluence of debate to occur in a way that it flows through to politicians, and to do that without it becoming arcane and boring. You know, the complexity here is it's actually quite a complex economic issue, Brexit, and we were voted yes or no. So I think the ways that we are going to seek to do it are to do that editorially and to do that in interesting ways for the audience, so you get some of the light and shade of that through the discussion.
Mm. Do you think Channel 4 could see it as part of its mission to create a more enlightened, more detailed, more realistic debate about this?
I think, you know, Chucko raised the interesting point, loving that he name-checked Gogglebox there, but the point is to do that in a way of how it flows through to society and what it means for Britain, right? It's not for us to influence the debate, because we're impartial in that sense. It's for us to allow the audience ways to input into that doesn't make it arcane and boring, you know? So the ways that we're trying to do that are that bring it home to the regular viewer all around Britain in a way that's interesting to them.
Because it does feel a bit like you know, I think that people were annoyed enough to have to even have a referendum to start with. The fact that it's just chuntering on month after month, you get a sense that perhaps the public appetite for the detail is just, you know, rock bottom.
They're bored of the debate, and I think if Channel 4 could liven it up, I think it would be incredibly helpful, because at the moment we have the spectrum of newspapers, you know, and it's great there's a diversity of opinion, but they're boring us because nobody knows the facts. So they're creating anxiety without really guiding people to have a debate about what is meaningful. And I don't think people know what to do. So if Chucko says, can people lobby to stay in a customs union, I might get the phrasing wrong, do people know that that is a good option? Are they really clear that's an option? And what should they do about that? And I think we probably need a trusted media provocateur to help stimulate that debate.
Because part of the issue is digitally, in a digital environment, a social media environment, you're simply in an echo chamber.
Yeah.
So you're not getting into that debate because you're having a polarised set of views. And that's an important consideration for advertisers, right? Because, you need to reach all of Britain, whether it's of one view or the other. And TV allows us to get into that debate and kind of bring it to the whole audience.
I would add that I think we all have a role to play, and media owners in particular do, to inform the debate. But we, Hearst, and all the magazine businesses are apolitical, but we do write for our audiences. So, for example, Cosmopolitan would have a very different perspective on Brexit from a millennial perspective to some of our older skewing titles. But, essentially, the fact that our audiences don't know where to turn now for advice that they can trust, and that's something that we're hearing ever more. The newspapers are very party political, as Lindsay says, and you know what you're going to get. You go to the Mail, you're going to, you know what you're going to get. Similarly, other titles. So I think our role is actually to just provide a very impartial but trusted, and we're being asked to provide increasingly financial information now by our audiences because they don't know where to turn. Finance is a very complicated sector, and Brexit makes it more concerning perhaps, and there's anxiety around personal finance as well as the economy generally. And we're hearing from our readers that they would value greatly more of a focus on slightly weightier topics through our titles because they trust what they read in them. And that's trust that's been built up over many, many years, obviously. So I think media owners can play a big part in this, actually.
So the issue of trust, and you touched on it when you were talking about, it's about sentiment. And one of the things that certainly I'd say we would experience, we're trying to sell our services, not just in UK, but abroad and so on. I know certainly, Lindsay, you've got a lot of experience of that. And very interested in your experiences of whether sentiment about buying from Brand Britain has changed at all, because I was speaking to someone who's actually in the audience today who travels a lot with business, and I said, what was your experience of the reaction to Brexit? Have some people been going, good on you, standing up for independence, or have they been more wary? And basically they said, if I summed it up in one word, it's pity, and which isn't great. And what are the implications for us in trying to sell ourselves as service providers globally?
Yeah, I think that's why I think the HSBC ad is and it was sort of deliberately stirring at the end. But I think we do, we're a creative industry. How can we help show that we're open for business, that we're a great place to work? And I do think it's pity, or it's a bit like how we say, sorry, God, what a nightmare when we meet people in New York about Trump. That's what they broadly say to us about Brexit. And that is, I think, a valuable comparison. So I don't think anyone is patting us on the back and saying, well done for doing it. They're kind of saying, God, what does it mean? And I guess the challenge is we don't quite know what it means, but I think we have to go and show that we are. I think the rhetoric was incredibly divisive, and we don't want to, I think the worry is we're going backwards. We don't want to be Little Britain.
But you're right, that is changing consumer perspective about sentiment of trust. I mean, within Britain, even before we get to other countries, what consumers are wondering, what can they trust, in what environments can they trust it? And for young people, that's even more true than ever. They're consuming news, and they're concerned about what is fake news and what is independently sourced, proper journalism. And that's I see that as an opportunity for us, because whether that be with the audience or whether that be with advertisers who want their advertisements to appear alongside quality things that are trusted by the audience. So for public service television that's commercially funded, that's an opportunity. But we need to ensure that we never lose that trust with the audience.
Okay. Another question that's come in is regarding talent, which is something you were talking to, Lindsay, but will big constraints on free movement of people be calamitous for, particularly they're asking about the UK digital industry, but really we're all in the business of probably the one thing that we can push through Brexit with more effectively is just being brilliant and being talented and being an unrivaled source of talent. So how are we feeling about that? And are you experiencing any movements in talent within your organisation?
I think it's a huge issue, but it's a huge opportunity. So how do we nurture, protect, inspire talent here in the UK? And then how do we think about exporting that talent out? And then how do we embrace the diverse skills that other people can bring in? I don't want to My only worry with that would be we might just start sort of being jingoistic and talking about how amazing we are. But I think we are amazing with 30-40% of our workforce in those digital or those analytical businesses coming from outside of the UK, but part of the EU.
So perhaps open up more rather than...
Yeah, I'm not in favour of closing all those borders to brilliant creative people that can help contribute to our businesses.
I mean, this is what's odd about Brexit, isn't it? At the time that digital's opening up and, increasingly the world is flat, and we're building bridges ever more, Brexit looks to the world as if we're putting up a great big wall. So the question is how attractive, whilst it still remains very, very attractive to people coming to the UK and to London in particular, whether that changes post-Brexit in sentiment terms is a big concern, I would have thought.
And it shouldn't be calamitous because actually the settled status is reasonably clear, so you just need to get in front of it. The difference is what happens.
I think
after
sentiment plays a lot of and experience. I mean, I think there are a lot of there's a lot of talk about how difficult it is for EU people in this country to get the right documentation and status processed through the Home Office, and that the Home Office are overwhelmed. People will take their cue from that and vote with their feet, probably. And certainly we've lost about 4 people in the last 6 months, where not from stamping their feet and going, right, we're off because of Brexit, but actually, we're thinking of getting married. Actually, we might go back, we might go home and do that because we're not sure whether our future's here and so on. And it's perhaps a slightly more subtle thing that comes into play. But perhaps as an industry, we need to lean in harder and say, we may be moving to a different relationship with the EU, but we're more open to the world than ever before. But it's going to need tangible proof and so on. The thing I was interested in as well is whether there are technical or geographical challenges or changes that you are going to have to embrace as a result of Brexit. I'd say we've opened an office in North America in the last year. Against this backdrop, but also we have made at least one major client in continental Europe saying to us, we were doing most of our stuff in London, we now want to do it on the continent, you need to structure yourself that way. I wondered whether, I know that we're a client service business, so we're slightly different, but are you experiencing any structural stresses or anything that you would need to shape around?
I would say as part of it, we're an American business. Our headquarters is in New York, and I think if anything, we're creating a stronger bond with our parent. It's interesting because the way we work with our European colleagues is essentially to produce content for them. So we're seen increasingly as a global content hub. So we're creating, fabulous content which then gets reused around the world because, content is, as Alex said, content is increasingly global. So if anything, from a content perspective, we're actually becoming more global, not less, and Brexit won't change that. We've developed a global content sharing platform, which is, fabulous for us because, creating all of the millions of words that we do and pictures on an ongoing basis means that we can better share as appropriate, always as appropriate for our local audiences and often re-edited for our audiences locally. But, that's a big opportunity for global brands. And again, as Alex says, media's becoming more global.
I think that the international export of content and British creative industries, whether it be advertising, whether it be fashion, whether it be television and film content, has come from a core bed of strong craft skills in the industry. People coming into the industry, funding from the BBC, from Channel 4, from ITV and others. There's an ongoing digital threat to that where what's happening is the cream of that at the high end is being taken off, kind of pushing up prices. Our job is to continue ensuring that the talent comes into the industry, and Brexit is one of the threats, whether you're in an agency, whether you're a publisher, whether you're a broadcaster, to that. Because without that ongoing bed, in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years, there won't be the exports. So that's the sort of thing that we need to stay strong and attuned to.
And there won't be the professionally produced media, which advertisers kind of rely on for the trust and the environment and the context.
Well, it's interesting if it feels very strongly that we need to assert more profoundly really than ever a sense that we are the trusted source for quality and creativity, but also actual truth. and veracity, and increasingly, so perhaps that's the path forward. So
Well, that's interesting. I mean, that's not a Brexit-specific thing, but what we're seeing is huge tranches of money, advertising money, moving out of, you know, those professionally produced, trusted media into social media. And in the week where Edelman found that only 25% of the country trust information they're reading on social platforms, that's fascinating.
You have
right?
to worry
Because
about long-term
You do have to worry about that.
attribution and where you're appearing.
So the economic uncertainty, which perhaps Brexit has stimulated to some extent, is also driving this short-termism within media and advertising, which is to the detriment of long-term branding, I would argue very vociferously, because that short-term, you know, metrics of success have become ever more, you know,
I think the only danger with that is it's kind of linked to, let's not go back to Little Britain, let's not position ourselves as legacy, traditional, you know, we are part of the digital connected future, and I think that's the core message to go forward. You know, post-Brexit, we are super strong in Brazil, in China, in India, and they are all huge opportunities for us. So how do we take what we've got here out beyond the EU?
Well, I'm very conscious of time. I'm getting signalled, and I mean, I would say that was a very interesting conversation, albeit brief. It's very, very clear that we're going to have to grasp the implication of change with as much kind of bravado and bravery as we can on all of these dimensions. So, thank you very much for that. Please give our appreciation to the panel.
Okay.